Welcome to summer in the inland Northwest. Snowbirds have returned, days are long, and boats are in the water. Whether you spend your days in the lake, at the golf course, or on the trails, it's a great time to be outside in the inland Northwest. Of course, many of the challenges we face don't go away with the cooler temperatures. Supply chain issues persist, as do housing shortages. Gas prices are rising along with interest rates, while stock prices fall and war persists. All the while, COVID is out of the spotlight, but not completely removed from our daily lives. But here in the inland Northwest, we aren't afraid of a little adversity. We are nothing if not resilient, resourceful, and perseverant. At the Journal of Business, we endeavor to keep you, our readers, informed about what's happening in your community. Our staff is dedicated to providing you with clear-eyed, objective information on news and trends, with the goal of helping you be more successful on your chosen path. It's time to go beyond the sound bites. It's time for more depth than 140 characters can provide. It's time for elevating the conversation.
Good afternoon and welcome to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Paul Reed. I'm honored to be publisher of the Journal of Business. I'm also honored that every month so many of you choose to join us for an hour or 45 minutes really, conversation about some issues facing our business community. That's why we started Elevating the Conversation, more than a year and a half ago, and we've had 20 very successful sessions, had great speakers such as Stephanie Curran, Frank Velazquez, Shelley O'Quinn, Jim Frank, Steve Scranton, Larry Crowder, Chef Chad White, and many, many others. Next month, we have Eric Sawyer, CEO of Spokane Sports, for a discussion about business of sports in Spokane, a hot topic these days. But today, we are very pleased to have with us Kris Bliesner, CEO of Vega Cloud, for a discussion about the daunting subject of cybersecurity. There isn't an organization around that isn't impacted by this subject. And all of us have been taking significant measures to protect ourselves from bad guys that can do some devastating harm to our organizations. The subject is full of frustration and uncertainty, and I'm sure this will be a very compelling conversation. But before we get to that, I want to thank Impact Washington for sponsoring this month's Elevating the Conversation. We've had some fantastic partners who have stepped up to help us bring this Elevating the Conversation series to you, and Impact Washington has once again stepped up to do that. Today, I'm very pleased to have with us Impact Washington's Nick Wilkes to say a few words. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick Wilkes with Impact Washington, account executive representing Spokane and the east side of the state. We're excited to be elevating the conversation on cybersecurity with the Spokane Journal of Business and the local business community today. Impact Washington is a nonprofit group dedicated to serving Washington manufacturers. We're affiliated with the Commerce Department's National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and the MEP program, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Through these affiliations, we're a mission-driven group dedicated to increasing the competitiveness and security of small and medium-sized businesses across the state. We do this through coaching, training, and implementing best practices with our boots on the ground. Today, we'll be learning about cybersecurity, a topic near and dear to our hearts and to many of our small clients who are most vulnerable to these attacks. Not only can cyber attacks cause financial harm to businesses, they're also a threat to our national security. According to Checkpoint Research, in 2021, cyber attacks from manufacturers increased 41% and 50% across all businesses. We're learning that the criminals are becoming more sophisticated by the day and attacks are on the rise. Cybersecurity can seem like a daunting task for any business. We encourage all businesses to start soon and start small to make it feel more manageable. There are ample resources available to get started. For example, you can perform a gap assessment and implement good cyber hygiene within your operation for free or low cost. We encourage you to commit to taking a small step today to improve your cybersecurity posture. If you'd like to learn more about our group and what we do, you can visit impactwashington.org. We'd also like to say thank you to the Journal of Business for helping raise awareness on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Kris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Elevating the conversation. I forgot to tell you not to wear green. I'm glad you didn't. We're in front of a green screen. This isn't an actual fire today. Appreciate you joining us, taking some time this afternoon.
You bet.
You know, unfortunately, our conversation is timely today because we've had a cybersecurity incident in the news with Whitworth University going through kind of a hellish experience, it sounds like. But I suppose that's not as uncommon as we might think these days.
No, I think we've seen more and more of these, and this is the public side of it.
Sure.
For sure. There's businesses that have been impacted in our own area that maybe haven't come out and talked about it as much, or it's been as known. But I think everybody has been impacted in some way, shape, or form in the last few years, and it's interesting to see that the level that it's gone to lately.
Yeah. Can you kind of walk us through what typically happens in these situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, I don't know the specifics here, but
Sure.
I think for cybersecurity in general, the bulk of attacks that we're seeing are ransomware attacks, and so that's up, and it's 2/3 or more of all malware attacks these days are ransomware. And I think what's interesting about it is that it's gone through a couple of iterations. So it used to be that you had to have smart folks on the other end, the bad actors, sort of putting together these computers and these servers to sort of hack their way into your infrastructure. Now you have a thing called ransomware as a service, where any bad guy with no tech skills at all can sort of subscribe to a service and target your business. And so the ability for folks to be able to leverage negative impacting infrastructure to go after your business has grown tenfold. And so I think that's part of the challenge of why you're seeing so many more attacks these days.
Sure. Well, and that brings up, I was curious about the trend in terms of frequency. The impression that you have is that this is continually becoming more common.
Oh, absolutely. I think since the pandemic started, we've seen cyber attacks increase over 800% year over year.
Wow.
And I think the challenge there is that those are the reported attacks. So folks that are reporting to the FBI or other law enforcement institutions. And so the unreported ones, and there are many, could be much higher than that.
Sure. So when we talk about these types of attacks, is there any user that is more at risk than another?
It's interesting. I think, part of what has caused this challenge is not only the bad guys having better infrastructure, so the ransomware as a service sort of thing, but also we've gone to sort of this remote working setup that many businesses continue to support and run. And what's interesting about that is that's changed the landscape of security. So it used to be that you had to harden a building, so your office, your storefront, whatever it might be, and that was where your infrastructure was. That's where your security perimeter was. And maybe you had a remote worker or two, and those were your sales folks, but the reality was they were on the road and it wasn't too big of a risk point. When we shoved everybody into their homes and people working from home, that created this massive network of open vulnerabilities, because now you're sitting on a communal network, you're in a cul-de-sac somewhere sharing Wi-Fi with 10 other houses, or you're in an apartment building or whatever. And so the footprint is much different, the network security is much different. So office buildings are typically locked, secure facilities. They use all kinds of great IT network security devices and things. None of that exists in your house. And so that, I think, emboldened bad actors to say, wow, now I used to have to guess my way in, and the sales guys really didn't have a whole lot of access to things anyway. And so, but now everybody from the company is working remote. And so now I can just pick somebody who works from the company and I can find a way in. And so I think that's the attack surface has gotten much, much bigger.
Sure. So what can companies do in those environments then?
It's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of tools and technology out there. We've created one called Secure Work Remote to help companies do just that, work securely remotely. I think, what's interesting about this whole sort of change to remote work is that you add into the ransomware as a service, the attackers have much better skills and capabilities than they used to.
Sure.
And our technology infrastructure really hasn't changed to keep up with that. And so what you typically ask businesses is, when's the last time did you actually spent new money on security or change something on the security front. And typically it's years or decades.
Sure.
And so that's a challenge, because as the technology landscape changes, you have to keep up with it.
Right, right. So just real quick before we get farther in and I forget, please ask questions after Kris and I finish with our conversation. We'll get to some of yours. You can type them in anytime, and in about 30 minutes or so, maybe less at this point, we'll see what Kris has to say about how you quiz him. It's interesting to think that some of the responsibility goes down to the individual level at this point.
Yeah.
So individual employees have to be prepared to guard against some of these vulnerabilities. Or is there anything that you can do at the individual level?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see at the individual level is a lot of training.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all hopefully better equipped now than we were to deal with phishing emails or other things.
Sure.
Where we're worried about folks trying to find their way into our organization one way or another. And I think those are getting more sophisticated. You're seeing lookalike domains and other things being stood up. We see those all the time where people are maybe taking a misspelling of a company domain and putting it online, copying your website, and then making it appear like it's your website, and then sending you a phishing email to go to that website and log in. You've now given them your credentials. They can log into the other website and do some real damage. And so I think, again, the tactics are changing. And so people have to be aware of that. It just, training helps.
Sure.
We're big fans. We've partnered with a company called Stickley on Security to help provide user training to end businesses. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's something that they can take on a quarterly basis or an annual basis to just keep up to date on security threats and how to think about them.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And you had mentioned law enforcement previously, where the statistics that we have are based on people who actually do report it to FBI. What's happening on the law enforcement front? I mean, there's no other realm that we're in where you could steal, hold someone ransom for $1 million, and my perception is get away with it as easily as you can now.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's frustrating, right? And I think a lot of us share that frustration, and that we're really looking at the federal government to do more. A lot of these attackers are overseas,
Sure,
in various places where maybe the United States doesn't have strong extradition rights or other capabilities to sort of go after these folks, and so that creates a challenge. Sometimes it's nation states that are doing it. I think when the pandemic first started, we saw a lot of nation states looking for viral information, so looking for treatments and antibody treatment information, or trying to attack drug companies and those kinds of things to steal information. And so you're seeing some of those kinds of things, more topical. But I think in general, it is a difficult thing because the federal government's pretty powerless in a lot of cases to do much about it.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. Is that something you see improving in the future, or?
It's interesting. I think as we start to get a handle around the key infrastructure components around digital transformation, I think I was reading a World Economic Forum report the other day that IT infrastructure and attacks on it are now considered a top 10 risk for sort of issues within the world. And I think 10 years ago, that wouldn't have even made the list. And so
Sure.
I think people are starting to realize, as we're more digital in what we do and how we run our businesses, that it's important to protect those assets and do that in a very important way. And I think that's going to empower folks to create laws for protection and prosecution and those kinds of things. And so hopefully, as we start to get our arms around this problem better, we'll be able to do that. But that's going to take some time.
Sure. And forgive me if I'm asking you a question outside of your area of expertise, but I wonder if are we learning more about the demographics or the type of operations that are performing these attacks?
I think one of the things we're learning, again, with ransomware as a service, is that those are typically centralized in areas that it's hard for the US to go after. But I think the actual attackers, the folks that are going after it, those could be local folks. Again, you don't have to have tech skills anymore. You can sort of farm that out, if you will,
Okay.
outsource it to folks that are actually doing the work. And the reality is, that can work, well for the bad folks or not so well. But I think for us, it localizes it a little bit more, which maybe may help law enforcement go after those folks.
Sure.
Which would be good. But I also think it widens the group of folks that could leverage those tools for bad.
Yeah. I've got a really silly layman's question for you. I think we've all gotten those emails that say, hey, I've got your personal information, and if you don't send me $1,000 today, and you ignore them and nothing happens. Sure. How does an individual or a company know the difference between a legitimate threat and a false threat like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The reality is you'll know. So none of the real threats are going to come through email.
Okay.
And so your machines aren't going to work. Your data is not going to be available. You might get an internet page that's showing a message, or maybe even something on your PC that shows up. And so from that perspective, it's going to be really obvious.
Okay.
Because you won't be able to complete your normal workday activities. And so if it's normal course of business, phone calls and emails, you can ignore all those.
But if it's typically, you're not going to have access to your own information. Correct. Or processes.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I was curious about is the insurance industry's role in addressing this challenge. What do you see as its role, and what kinds of things?
It's interesting. I don't want to pick on them too much, but I think they've been part of the problem a little bit early on, because you're seeing now where folks that have cyber insurance or insurance that covers these sorts of things, they'll be quick to pay. And so the insurance adjusters will get involved. And because they recognize that it's ransomware and they know there's nothing they can do about it, and if they've got the coverage for it, they'll literally negotiate with the ransom folks and get it paid quickly. Well, the bad actors have figured that out. And so, whenever you have this sort of situation where there's a quick sort of response and a quick to get paid real money, you're now making it a more viable attack vector. I remember back in my IT career, when the biggest deals that folks were going after from an IT perspective was, millions of accounts, because you got pennies on the dollar for each account, and that got posted on the dark web. Well, that's no longer the case. You can target a small business here in Spokane, Washington, hold them ransom for $40,000 and get paid tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so that's a challenge. And we've got to look at that from an insurance perspective. We've got to stop paying quickly. We've got to start thinking about how do we, before we issue the insurance, how do we require people to do things that are going to help guard against that in the first place? Because the reality is, at that point, it's really about just trying to get your business back online. But
sure,
the catastrophe has already happened, right? And so we're trying to figure out how do we get in front of it.
Sure.
And I think that's the bigger piece we need to focus on.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I imagine some of those bad actors have access to the relationships between the insurers and the companies, and know who's more likely to pay fast.
Absolutely. In case, there's a lot of databases on the dark web. I'm sure they can download insurance companies' client lists. We've seen bad actors go after vendor lists and download your own vendor list. So when you get attacked, they'll go through your records and download your vendor list, because maybe somebody you're working with is also using the same insurance company, because people tend to
talk.
Yeah, sure. People tend to share relationships, and so we've seen that as well.
Yeah. And is this a problem that you see that's going to be perpetual, something we're always going to be fighting, or are we in the midst of a rash of attacks that's going to subside at some point?
Yeah, I don't think the attacks are going to go away. I think we're going to wake up to doing business differently. And so and by that, I mean taking security more seriously in terms of cybersecurity, changing the way we think about it. Again, the bad actors have way better infrastructure. They've improved, but your security infrastructure likely hasn't changed in the last decade. And so we need to think more broadly about how we do that. There's great tools and technology. We make some, but there are many others as well out there that you can leverage to either work remotely securely or secure your office better, and really, you'll hear terms like zero trust networks and those kinds of things that are being developed and released so that it's a lot harder for folks to get in and get a hold of your data.
Sure, sure. I do have a few more questions for Kris, but please share yours at any time, and we'll get to them as soon as we're done. I was curious to know about the individual level. So of course we're
Sure.
the Journal of Business, we're interested in corporations, but is there exposure for individuals, and are there things that they should be doing with their personal devices?
Yeah, I mean, it's best practices that everybody will teach you. Change your passwords, turn on multi-factor authentication for everything,
Yeah.
because that's really, really hard to spoof. And so, that alone will help. If you take nothing else away from this, turn on multi-factor authentication for everything you care about, and that will actually increase your security footprint quite a bit. I know it's a hassle, but most everybody's got their phone on them anyway, and so getting a text and punching it in every time you got to log into your bank is not a bad thing.
Sure, sure. With Vega Cloud, so what role does the cloud play in cybersecurity and the services that you offer?
So I think about cloud infrastructure and particularly the hyperscalers, so Amazon and Google and Microsoft.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The hyperscalers.
Oh, sure.
So
sure.
Amazon and Microsoft and Google, they're a fantastic toolbox. And so
Sure.
they provide all these great tools for you to use, to consume, to run your IT infrastructure, tools that you may not have, or may not have, the level of tooling that they have. And so I think the benefit is, in a lot of cases, we see companies that move to the cloud that can increase their security posture just in moving, both from a physical footprint perspective, because your server is not in your closet anymore. It's actually offsite and somewhere out of reach. So physical security is better, but also just being able to have enterprise grade security infrastructure and software available to you can actually help as well. And so I think that's a big piece. And then the third-party pieces on top. So things like Vega Secure Worker Mode is an area where we're helping companies do a much better job of managing remote workers. There's no data that's stored at the remote location. There's no data that's transported to the remote location. And so from our perspective, it's a great opportunity to just fix the problem in general. We just assume that your machine is compromised because it probably is. And that way we know we'll never store data there and we'll never transmit it. And so
Sure,
it's a great solution to do that.
I remember when I guess probably 10, 15 years ago, the argument was disaster recovery, right? And that's still probably a benefit, but you have the security options as well.
And I think the bad guys, the hackers, are getting smarter about disaster recovery as well. Most people have a standard rotation window for that stuff. I know businesses typically will say, okay, we're going to back up, maybe 7 days in a row and do a 30-day rotation or whatever it might be. The challenge is that once the ransomware is in your software, if they make it all the way through your backup window before they exploit your systems, then it does no good to have backups, because now they're in your backups and you restore a backup and the ransomware is still there. So
Sure.
I think they're getting smarter about that. And again, we have to protect our data in different ways. So the cloud introduces cheap storage. So it's easy to store copies all over the place of critical files and secure them. And so that's another way to sort of work through that as well.
Sure. Great. Well, Paul, do we have any questions at this point?
We don't yet, but let me go ahead and add one of my own, and that is many of our readers are small businesses, so fewer than, say, 25 or 50 individuals who don't have as many resources as larger companies. What advice would you give a small business person in preparing themselves for cybersecurity?
I think that there are a lot of great tools for small business. We, in fact, work with several businesses that have 20 or less employees with our Secure Work Remote product, but there are others out there as well. And I think use name brand third-party tools and services. So Microsoft has great services available to you, Google, other folks, because those are going to be built and maintained on enterprise software and infrastructure that's secure. And so trying to do this yourself and manage it yourself, I think those days are over. You don't need a server in your closet anymore. Get rid of that, move all that stuff into cloud services. and be free of the hardware side of things. I think it's one of the best things you can do.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. Anything that you see coming up for Vega Cloud that you think would be interesting for our readers?
I think we were talking earlier, I think, we're doing really well in the regulated spaces. So banks, credit unions, financial services, insurance, healthcare. And the reason being is because a lot of those folks are government mandated to sort of comply with certain security frameworks or compliance frameworks. But those are folks that are typically ahead of it.
Sure.
And so because they're required to do so. And so I think that, we're going to start to see other businesses, other verticals come to the table and say, hey, listen, we're tired of being the target of bad actors that don't care whether our business is up and running. And
Sure.
we want to be, we want to do the right thing for our customers and our consumers. And so we're looking forward to expanding outside of sort of the regulated industry folks and into sort of consumer goods, manufacturing, and other folks as well.
Sure. Great. Any other questions at this point? Gosh, I'm about out of questions. Anything else? Any other takeaways for you?
No, I mean, I think, listen, this is an important topic, and I think a lot of people cover it. So, you can read and just get better every day. Education is a lot of the key here. And so training your folks, reading up about, the latest hack or the latest security vulnerabilities. There was a new one on Chrome the other day. So if you use the Chrome browser, make sure you update your Chrome browser. That
Sure.
typically happens pretty automatic, and Chrome sort of prompts you to do it anyway.
Sure.
But I think those kinds of things, we always need to be patching. We always need to be updating things, updating your passwords and all that. Those are normal sort of order of business sort of things. There are tools to make it easier. So if you need help, please reach out.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Kris.
You
I
bet.
sure appreciate your time.
You bet.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Stay cool out there. Thank you to Impact Washington for being our sponsor this month. Please join us in September when we'll be talking about the business of sports in the Inland Northwest with Eric Sawyer from Spokane Sports. And until then, stay safe. Thanks.